Another painting tutorial by Andrew Broussard. This is, I believe, number 82. And in front of me, I have my quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. I'm spritzing my palette. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. I'm going to wet this sheet completely using the Hake brush. My Hake brush looks a little stained. I think, phthalo blue, I used it yesterday, and that seems to stain the hairs on my brush despite rinsing it off. So what I do is I just soak this thoroughly, and while it soaks, the paper warps and whatnot, and then I stretch it out with the binder clips, and then I'll start painting on it. Now, I had saw in a post on one of the watercolor forums, and they were talking about people that do tutorials, and I guess they were kind of complaining about music and all that, which I understand because people have a hard time. They don't really learn anything, or if music's playing and you're just watching it. I think that was their argument. And then some people are complaining that the people do talking before they get started, and as well as set things up while the video's rolling. So if I do any of those things, I apologize, but I kind of feel like this is a good flow where kind of introduce the concept and talk about what the plan is, and then kind of jump into the painting. So, and I think I always try to address some questions that I get in the comment section of YouTube at the beginning of these paintings, or and whatnot. Like recently, somebody had asked about to be a little bit more specific about the brands that I use and the colors that I'm going to use. And if you follow me, kind of a lot of the painting is stream of consciousness, but I do try to stick within what I said at the beginning. And okay, so I'm going to start at this point. So anyway, I have my palette here on the side. I think I'm going to stick with the Venetian red and the sap green today. I did a tonalist style oil painting last night, and those are the two colors I use with the oil painting to mix that brown. And then into that, I usually mix a black, a blue, and white. So that's usually kind of this basic minimal palette for my oil paintings. So here, I had started playing around with the red-green combination, and then I started tacking on a few more colors, mainly a phthalo blue and a ultramarine blue, to kind of push in different directions, where I felt that it was changing the green and was helping out in that aspect, as well as the blue potentially making it cooler and recede back a little bit more, while phthalo blue was kind of darkening and pull forward. Brand wise, Da Vinci brands, except for the phthalo blue, which was Van Gogh brand. Now, this is today's experiment, so I'm going to use something like that. I might add a color or two into that for dark aspect and whatnot. But today's experiment is to do that, and if you look back, you'll see paintings where I do that. But I'm going to add in Titan Buff, which is kind of a slightly cream color white, and I have a gouache right here, white titanium. I'm thinking that I might put these on the palette and experiment with the white of the paper versus those whites right there to see it. Okay, so that's the idea, and now we are going to jump into this painting. There's going to be a lot of pushing around of shapes, adding and subtracting, using the water bottle to re-wet stuff, and it's essentially applying the techniques that I learned from Stuart Davies and the oil painting to watercolor itself. So I mixed those two together. They're complementary colors. You're going to get kind of a brown with greenish tints, with reddish tints, and it makes for a very interesting almost kind of a monochromatic painting with some leaning in either direction. The landscape itself is going to be made up. It might be inspired by yesterday's oil painting. We'll see what happens. We're just going to put our masses in and let the paint spread around and see what happens. But in yesterday's oil painting, I barely used any white. And I decided near the end to throw the white in on the sky horizon and kind of soften it all in. And that's kind of what got me thinking about playing around with whites with the oil watercolor. Okay, so I'm just dapping this in. Going to be darkening, going to be softening, going to be lifting, etc. So it's a lot of back and forth. And it's almost kind of like, I believe the channel is Mind of Watercolor. That gentleman has this stuff called spontaneous watercolor painting, where he'll take super saturated, super wet paper and throw some colors in, let them move around, and then create a landscape out of it. I'm not quite sure if some of those he had something in mind when he was doing it, or if he was working from picture or not, but that's a very cool series of videos, and I'd recommend checking that out. Okay, so let me grab my paper towel and I'll show you what I mean if you haven't seen me do this before. We could take paper towel and erase, add bird holes, move some colors around here. I'm just going to put some tone in the sky, and it's just going to be a back and forth of swiping and lifting. And while I make some more concentrated mixture, I'll do my little pitch. Down below I have a link for Patreon. I would love for you to consider joining that. I have like two really cheap tiers, like a $3 tier and a $5 tier. Essentially just to help with purchases of supplies. Because now that I'm going to be demonstrating more oils, those guys get expensive, the surfaces and whatnot. And I go through a lot of watercolor paper. And you know what, if you can't support, that's totally fine. I totally understand. And you know, no obligation. And please, you know, continue watching these videos. You know, that really means a lot to me, just having people watch and interact and discover. So, so that's my pitch on that. I also have the Etsy link down below. A lot of these watercolors will make their way onto there, and you know, so give that a check out. I also have some oil paintings up on there, but it takes a little while for them to get there because of drying times. You know, so if I'm going to film an oil or post a video online or just a photo, it's going to take a little while. What else? Of course, always, you know, like, subscribe, comment, anything that, like I said in the beginning, anything that I'm not addressing that you'd like me to address, or anything I'm not making clear, you want me to make clear, please ask and I will try to incorporate that. And like I say a lot, I'm a school teacher by trade, so I also genuinely enjoy giving these videos and lessons and whatnot. I also have Twitter if you want to follow me on there. Not Twitter, Instagram. I did my first live video there that was talking about a silly incident with the cats. If we have time later in this painting, I'll tell you about it. And of course, I live streamed all these videos on Twitch. I was going to try to live stream on Instagram because I thought that would have been interesting. But it seems like my camera was picking up too dark. Like the whole just camera in general is just way too dark in the live looking feed. Now what I'm doing here is kind of pulling out strips for the idea of trunks. They might wind up getting painted over. And it's kind of just a building of layers. A back and forth process taking place. And right now it's just still that same mixture of those two colors, just building this up, and then I'm going to start playing with the blues into this mix. As you progress with this approach and this technique, the paper will get drier and drier because you're lifting. You can always have the water bottle nearby to soften things up and re-wet areas if need be. So at the moment, I think you guys get the gist of what I'm doing, so I'm going to tell the cat story. So my friend had raised pheasants, and he had given me, and I asked him for these bunch of feathers for, maybe doing quill pens with and cutting and whatnot, doing those type of things. I'm using just a wet rigger to see if I can move and create shapes, potentially lift a little differences. Anyway, so I had them in a jar, and they're pretty thin feathers, so I don't think they would really work for cutting quills and whatnot. But I had them in a jar, and the cats discovered the jar, and they would send one cat, Harrison, over to steal one of the feathers for them to play with. So Harrison would come out, steal one, bring the feather back, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't mind. I was like, all right, they're playing. It's cute, I'm getting used to having cats and kind of really enjoying it. I never thought I'd be a cat person. Anyway, so they're stealing it. And over the course of the days, I guess it gets down to the last feather in the jar. And the jar was far down. It was far down into it. And Hammy, one of the cats, was going for it. And unfortunately, he got his head stuck. So we rescued Hammy out of this jar. And we're like, Hammy, all that for the last feather, what are you doing? Anyway, so he got himself that last feather. And later on that night, laying in bed, I hear a cat, just crying from beneath the bed. And another just like donk, 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 like knocking into all the metal underneath the bed frame. And I'm like, no way. Did Hammy get stuck again? And he did. So we got him out and saved him. And that jar is just like where they can't reach it now. And there was no feathers in the jar at this point, so I'm not sure why he was still going in there. I don't understand cats completely yet. But yeah, so that was like really silly. And the other cat, Harrison, was the one that was doing the crying. So I'm assuming that this happened in the living room, and then they must have been like, oh, let's go to the humans and see if the humans can fix this. So it's pretty silly situation. I know they can get hurt seriously, so I'm gonna make sure that the house is even more cat proof. And that's why I haven't let him in the art room yet. But Yeah, that was just pure silliness. I think now, and I'm trying to open up a little softness and change tones, would be an interesting time to start adding our blue. Let's use ultramarine blue. And this is my idea to kind of get a purplish, I use ultramarine and the Venetian red for kind of a purple tint, but I want it to cool down the green, which also darkens it. I'm not totally sure what's going on in that mixture, to be honest. But this is it with the ultramarine starting to mix into it. And you'll see that there's a difference. Here's going to be water. So this is kind of based off of yesterday's composition in oil, which was a made-up composition. So this is the reflection. I find that I like my water reflections wet and wet, and if it's not wet enough, I'll just spray it. And I dropped my cat. Let's grab that. Okay. Let's do that. Let's do a little bit of rigor, just clean rigor, just to see what kind of lines we can push through here and what textures, and get layers going. If it's dry, I can pull out some more too. Come back over it. It'll meld together. A little dab in for texture. Okay, this is the phthalo blue. Phthalo blue, Venetian red gives me a darkish purple. Let's put in a little bit of darks and see how that works. I feel that a variety of so tone and then directional and texture, I feel that those have been becoming very important aspects in my painting. Take a rigger. This has actual paint on it now. I could start putting branch work and other tones in there. I am going to wind up darkening this significantly. Let's see. Okay, phthalo blue, sap green. It's giving me a very vibrant green. Can you see it on the video? Yeah, you could potentially catch it there. Let me throw it a little bit in. And on top of the others, it kind of makes it seem a little dark. And I can mix in the Venetian red to calm the green down. So Venetian red added to this mix. Blue, just trying to get more concentrated dark. And this is all going to be in shadow since we're backlit. I've been very intrigued with the blending of tonal masses. Like here's a dark, let's say, tree that's covered in vines and ivy and all that, and it's blending into this dark shadow on the ground, dark foliage, and that's pretty much blending into this guy right down here. We haven't really done any scraping in this one yet, but you know, of course, you can always scrape and get more textures in that fashion as well. With the oil painting, you can use the back of a brush to do that. In fact, you can do it with watercolor too. I have a hair right there I'm trying to get off. Let's see. You take the back of the rigger just to show how you can do that. So you use the back of the brush, you could use a fingernail, whatever you'd like. And I think we'll do a little lamp black in this, because I really want to push the darks. Here is kind of a water line reflection. And we have that grass up above. Intersperse some lamp black throughout. I don't usually use lamp black. I do have a couple of tubes of it. It's nice. You know, a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with, they either love black and watercolor or they hate it. But like I always say, a lot of the Payne's grays, even I think sepia might have it too. I'm not sure, sepia, but indigos as well may have black pigment in it. We could lift some spots. Now, so we see the white of the paper, and that's one of the goals of this experiment, is to see how the white, the paper, and a buff tighten, or the white gouache will affect and appear in regards to that. So I'll get around to that near the end, and I'll put some over in this area just so you can see and how it compares. So that's kind of the bigger experimental part of this painting. I think I want to bring a big tree right here. So I'm going to scrape him out. You kind of get a counter change effect. I could scrape out another one next to it. I could also have another one branching off right here. I feel like it would make too much emphasis on that tunnel shape, but that's where you want to just experiment. And I am going to take a black, put it along that back side. And I could take, since we're doing limited palette, Venetian red. Kind of texture that over it. Then I can build foliage up on top. Sorry, lamp black. Let this guy get grounded right in the ground. Cast his shadow as well. You could even accentuate this dark back here for that counter change effect. Variety in that shoreline line of land. Okay, could even bring that dark all the way down. Okay. Let's see. So here I'm just thinking, do I want to dry off and put in the foliage, or if I'm not ready just yet. I'm going to darken this backside back here. That shape came up a little too high. Okay, let's do a dry off, and then we'll put in some very concentrated foliage in this front tree, and then we'll experiment with some white, okay? that dried really nicely. I'm very pleased with how it's looking so far. But like I said, this guy is an experiment. Now, one thing, whenever you add those two guys, one of these guys, on your palette, they will taint the brush very easily, and they will taint other colors nearby very easily. And what I mean is, there's kind of a chalkiness to them, and it's kind of difficult to remove that from the brush in the middle of painting, you know, or at least for me, because I don't spend too much time cleaning the brushes mid-painting. But I'm wiping off the palette so that it doesn't blend into it. But that chalkiness, you just got to be aware of it. I also put a minimal amount on my palette with this. I'm going to first use the Titan Buff, so you can see it, and it has a kind of cream aspect to it. Now up here I had smushed around a little bit of that sap green Venetian red tone, so there really is no pure white of the paper here. That looks kind of like a pure white of the paper, and these guys right here are pure white. So I am going to take, I think I'm going to just dedicate a brush to the white as well. Make a little wash. And then I'll put it in and see if we get a difference. This actually almost seems to mimic the tone that I already had, tone and color that I had in place. Just let it carry over on top. Okay, so that was the buff titanium. You can see how it's kind of contaminating the water in a sense. The drip offs have that. So let me get that off of here. Let's get the white gouache. This is titanium white. Just a little bit. Using that same round. Okay, you can see how this is whitening it up back here. Within watercolors, there is, like, I guess 3 schools of thought. One that won't let white anywhere near their palette, others that will, and that others that kind of just don't care. It stems back to, I believe, the 1800s, where people were being fussy about what was pure watercolor and what wasn't. And apparently there was a whole bunch of art critics and whatnot that would tell people how to appreciate paintings and whatnot, and some of them were vehemently opposed to white being added into it. I'll even put some down here so you can see. Now with this white, it sometimes sits on top of the paper as opposed to in the paper itself. And I do have a pretty high concentration of it on there. But that's to let you see what it looks like. It does give a little interesting over effect, an atmospheric effect, if I wash it over these guys in that background. I'm kind of enjoying that effect taking place. It's a little too much probably, but there you go. Okay, so there's that. And since we have them on the palette, we're going to wind up utilizing them on some trees and whatnot. So we'll see that as well. Just mixing kind of a light. I want to get this to travel back a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to darken up this tree and bring that forward. And then we'll place it with some whites on branches and whatnot, and some highlights. So, like I said, here's some buff titanium over it. It seemed to kind of have that same tonal value, color value as what I've already had there. The Titan gouache white did have an effect, did give an interesting atmospheric overlapping right there, but you can see a little bit of the chalkiness. And here as well, you can see a little bit of that chalkiness. Of course, I'm going to drop that brush right on the painting. And I'm going to drop that tube right on the painting. Okay, so we want to pop the foliage on this. So I'm going to squirt some water on my sap green to get it kind of activated again. I'm going to pull out what I can. So this is sap green. I could also potentially mix the gouache with the sap green as well to kind of get that to pop a little bit more, but I don't think I want to do that. This is lamp black mixed in with that sap green. I'm trying to just vary the patterns. I could take my rigger and place some branches in. Black or a super dark art over a painting, and having it in the foreground often makes it pretty interesting. Let's just light for back in here. It's just that lamp black. Okay, Now, since I'm near the end, I'm going to take the rigger and I'm going to show you the Buff Titan on top of the painting in spots. So you can kind of get an idea. I find that sometimes it seems to get soaked into the painting, so it might go on strong and then kind of mellow out, especially if that area might be wet still. See right there, kind of soaked it in. Okay. I feel like this is a little too strong. Okay, and then here is the white gouache. So it kind of goes on pretty strong. Also, I think I referenced Mind of Watercolor earlier, talking about his spontaneous paintings. He, I believe, has a video, if you're interested in adding a white gouache, a video with the different brands and testing their saturation and how they hold up against other colors being painted over them or them being watered down. So that might be a good video for you all to watch. You can dot it in for little flowers. Small clusters that you can see. Let's stand up, take a look at it. Oh, somebody just came in. I like, once again, I live stream, and somebody just came in, and they come often. WB42CH is their handle, and they just came in and said, "Wait, I just got on, so I have to go on for a couple more hours." I'll definitely be back later on today painting. This one, if you just got on, was to kind of show two different whites that you could add to the palette and how they affected it. Up here, I had put what's called Buff Titan, which is kind of a cream color, and then this is a titanium gouache. Here's the white of the paper that was left. This was titanium gouache, Buff Titan. Not too much of a difference, kind of a little bit in the concentration. Buff Titan right there. So it's kind of an experiment to show people who are, thinking about trying out the gouache, the white paint. It was also to explore the tonalist approach in oils applied to watercolor, which I absolutely love applying that approach to watercolor. I feel like it's just a lot of tonal harmony. I used sap green, Venetian red, phthalo blue, ultramarine. Mainly use these two to get my browns and whatnot. These to kind of darken and push in other directions with the green. And then lamp black. And then whites were just added to kind of explore. Some of these whites I think we could have easily gotten from using the razor blade and scraping it out. And I think white is also easy to overuse. I'm trying not to overuse it. But I'll add a little bit of interesting elements with it. And you could also mix it with colors. I was kind of avoiding doing that because it has a, it's a little weird. But since you said don't go, I will do an experiment just for you. Let's mix a little titanium with, and it's so easy to contaminate other parts of the palette with that. So let me wipe that up real quick. I should have grabbed the sap green first. I'm going to take that sap green. So we have some sap green. Venetian red just to get a little brown, see what happens. And then mix the Titan. And let's see if we can put little lily pads on top. Kind of like that pond scum type stuff. We'll grab a little bit of ultramarine. I'll darken the edge. Now, as I look at it, that mass is a little weird, so I need to adjust that. I need to fix this recession. What I can do is just take Venetian red and ultramarine or purple. And dot in some bushes. I come back down here. A little more ultramarine. Venetian red. Sap green. Lamp black. Oh, okay. In the chat, they're from Florida, and I'm from Louisiana, and they had asked if the Hudson River Valley painters painted down here, wouldn't they have included Spanish moss and gators? That you're absolutely right. I think they would have. And let's see. I'm gonna take a little of that buff Titan. That's too much. Golly. Let's take that white, buff Titan, either or. And we can kind of dry brush on the side. What do you think? Is that kind of giving a mossy hanging effect right there? It looks a little like moss. You like that? I don't want to overdo it. But yeah, so you could take kind of the white or the buff titan side stroke, and you have kind of a moss effect hanging. It's something I think I might have done in a painting or two a year or so ago. So bringing the Hudson River Valley down to Louisiana. Alligator. Let me think about it for a second. While I think about it, let me play around in these trees. Accentuate a few more of these branches. With alligators, this would be a place where they would hang out. Even though I've seen them like everywhere, they love kind of like the inlets and the turns and stuff like that. I believe that's because they kind of ambush their prey, and they ambush them this time of day in the morning or the evening when the light isn't as well. I think that's when they hunt, and they use type of areas like this. In fact, if you're out in the bayou and swamp, marsh, whatever, you'll see areas where it's kind of like a muddy bank, and I believe that's where they're going up and they're sliding back down into the water. Um, so if we wanted an alligator, alligators will often hang out there with kind of their head and eyes, or sometimes just the eyes above the water. And sometimes you can catch a little bit of their back. And it's really cool watching them swim, because they'll when you watch them and you're like, if you're in a boat and you're up above one and they swim, and they'll serpentine, they'll move their body in that kind of fashion like a snake to swim. Trying to give them a little bit of a shadow, but that's blending too much into it. I haven't gone frogging in a long time, and it's yeah, it's been a while since I've been frogging and whatnot. But you see a lot of alligators when you're at night in the swamps and all that. Add some structures right here. We usually go bow fishing during the day, and that's like, the brightest time of day, and you want the sun directly overhead, so you can kind of see down into the water easier. But I had done a bow fishing trip once or twice at night, and you'll see a lot of alligators out then. There's some places I used to have a kayak and go kayaking, and then there were some places that I stopped going because the alligators were like just too big, and a little too aggressive on like the hot days, where you could easily kind of scare them off and they'll kind of duck and go away and whatnot. But I don't know, maybe it was like hot weather that I was out there one day where they were just not leaving the area that I was going in to kayak or fish and whatnot, or at least not even like going at the water. And they're just too big in that area. Lake Martin, so if you're familiar with Louisiana. And then there's Lake Fossey, which is a protected area, so they have some alligators that are like freakishly large out there. And it's always, you can see them out on the bank sunning. And yeah, it's always weird near the end of a kayaking trip where they'll probably put a little bit of Spanish moss on that little thing I just put on the right. What was I gonna say? Around the evening, like the water in the Atchafalaya Basin is clean and nice, but in a lot of areas near me, it's darker water, and this is just that side stroke to get that moss effect. But yeah, the water in the evening gets so creepy, and it's like, it becomes dark and hard to see down into. And you just think like, what's underneath there, Okay, so we put a little moss effect there too. All right, let's dry this off. We'll sign it and we'll put a mat on it. So the alligator didn't really pop out, but you and I know they're there. And we'll sign it. And I'm going to lift it up so we could all take a look. And then I will sign off and get this uploaded to YouTube. All right, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all later on. I'll come back on again this afternoon, I believe, to do another painting. Have a good one.